In a quiet corner of the countryside, where the air smelled of fresh hay and the mornings were painted golden by the rising sun, lived a man named Tom. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was the kind of person who blended into the background of his own life, content with simplicity. At 57 years old, Tom had spent most of his days working the land that had been in his family for generations. His home wasn't grand. It was a modest farmhouse with peeling paint and creaky floorboards, but it suited him just fine. What mattered most to Tom was the connection he felt to the earth beneath his feet and the animals that shared his space. Tom's farm wasn't large, but it had everything he needed. A vegetable garden bursting with tomatoes and carrots, chickens clucking happily in their coop, goats nibbling on wild grasses, and, of course, his prized pigs. The pigs weren't just livestock to Tom. They were like pets, each with its own personality. There was Bessie, the bossy one who always hogged the best mud puddles, and Wilbur, the curious runt who followed Tom everywhere. They roamed freely around the property, adding a touch of chaos to Tom's otherwise peaceful routine. The centerpiece of Tom's farm was the old red barn. It stood tall at the edge of the field, leaning slightly to one side, as if it were tired from decades of service. Its wooden planks were faded and splintered, marked by time and weather, but it still held together stubbornly. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like an ordinary barn, nothing special. But to Tom, it was priceless. His grandfather had built it with his own two hands, hammering nails and sawing boards long before Tom was even born. Every knot in the wood told a story, every scratch a memory. It wasn't just a building. It was a piece of history, a symbol of his roots. Life on the farm was predictable, almost meditative. Each morning, Tom woke up with the sunrise, fed the animals, repaired fences, and tended to whatever needed fixing. Afternoons were spent sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade while watching the fields sway in the breeze. Evenings brought the soft glow of fireflies dancing in the twilight. It was simple, yes, but it was enough for Tom. He didn't crave excitement or fame. He craved peace. But all of that changed when the developers came. Not far from Tom's farm, bulldozers began carving out chunks of land, replacing trees with cookie-cutter houses and dirt roads with paved driveways. A new housing development called Willow Creek Estates sprouted up practically overnight, filled with people who liked things neat and orderly. These newcomers didn't understand the rhythm of country living. They complained about the smell of manure, the sound of roosters crowing at dawn, and the sight of tractors rumbling down the road. Tom tried to ignore them, keeping to himself and hoping they'd do the same. Then Karen moved in. She was unlike anyone Tom had ever met. With her perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, and clipboard perpetually in hand, she carried herself like she owned the place, even though she didn't. Karen quickly appointed herself the unofficial leader of the Homeowners Association, HOA, determined to make Willow Creek Estates the picture-perfect neighborhood she'd always dreamed of. She organized meetings, handed out rule books thicker than phone directories, and patrolled the streets like a self-appointed sheriff. Most of the neighbors found her exhausting, but no one dared cross her. One day, while out for a walk along the edge of the development, Karen spotted something that caught her eye: Tom's barn. To her, it wasn't an old, worn-out structure. It was a rustic masterpiece, straight out of a magazine spread. She imagined herself posing in front of it, her blonde hair blowing dramatically in the wind, captioning the photo with hashtags like #farmhousechic and #countryvibes. In that moment, Karen decided the barn would be hers, for a photo shoot, at least. Little did she know, her plan would set off a chain of events neither she nor Tom could have anticipated. Karen's discovery of Tom's barn felt to her like stumbling upon a hidden treasure. To her mind, it wasn't just an old, weathered structure. It was the missing piece she needed to elevate her Instagram game. Karen had always fancied herself as more than just another suburban mom. She saw herself as a taskmaker, someone who could inspire others with her flawless aesthetic and curated lifestyle. Her feed was a carefully constructed illusion of perfection. Sun-drenched lats, yoga poses against breathtaking backdrops, and impeccably styled outfits. But lately, engagement on her posts had been slipping. Her follower count wasn't growing fast enough, and her dreams of becoming a full-time influencer seemed further away than ever. The barn, however, offered a glimmer of hope. The next morning, Karen marched over to Tom's property with purpose in her stride and determination etched across her face. She wore her signature look, skinny jeans tucked into knee-high boots, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head, and a clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. She knocked on Tom's front door, though not gently. When no one answered, she called out loudly, "Hello? Anyone home?" Hearing only silence, she decided to take matters into her own hands. After all, what harm could there be in getting a closer look at the barn? Tom, meanwhile, was busy inside the house fixing the leaky faucet. He heard footsteps crunching gravel outside, but assumed it was just one of his neighbors passing through. By the time he stepped out to investigate, Karen was already inspecting the barn, circling it like a hawk sizing up its prey. Startled, Tom cleared his throat loudly to get her attention. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. Karen spun around, startled for a moment before regaining her composure. Smiling brightly, she extended her hand. "Hi, you must be the owner of this charming little setup," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the barn. "I'm Karen, head of community relations for Willow Creek Estates." Tom raised an eyebrow at the title but shook her hand anyway. "Tom," he replied simply. Without missing a beat, Karen launched into her pitch. "Listen, Tom, your barn is absolutely stunning. It has such character, such charm. I'd love to use it as the backdrop for a photo shoot. Just think about it. A tasteful editorial shoot featuring me and some of my favorite pieces from local designers. It'll put your property on the map." She paused dramatically, waiting for him to express awe or gratitude. Instead, Tom blinked at her, clearly confused. "I appreciate the compliment," he said slowly, "but I don't think that's going to work. This is private property, and I prefer to keep things low-key around here." Karen frowned, unaccustomed to hearing the word no. Crossing her arms, she pressed on. "Surely you can make an exception. Think of the exposure. People will see how beautiful this area is, and maybe they'll want to visit. It's good for everyone." Tom shook his head firmly. "Sorry, but the answer's still no. The barn stays off-limits." For a brief moment, Karen looked genuinely shocked, as if the concept of rejection was foreign to her. Then her expression hardened. "Well, we'll see about that," she muttered under her breath before turning on her heel and striding back toward her car. As she drove away, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't seen the last of her. Over the following days, Karen became obsessed with the idea of using the barn for her photo shoot. She spent hours scrolling through Pinterest, envisioning elaborate setups. Flowing white dresses, picnic blankets spread with artisanal cheeses, mason jars filled with wildflowers. Each image fueled her determination. She convinced herself that Tom was being unreasonable and that he simply didn't understand the opportunity she was offering him. Her fixation grew so intense that she began enlisting others to help sway Tom's decision. At the next HOA meeting, she brought up the topic casually, framing it as a way to bridge the gap between the new neighborhood and the surrounding rural community. Some of the homeowners nodded politely, while others avoided eye contact altogether. One brave soul dared to ask, "Have you considered that maybe he just doesn't want strangers on his land?" Karen dismissed the question with a wave of her hand. "Oh, he'll come around," she said confidently. "People just need to see the bigger picture." What Karen failed to realize, however, was that Tom wasn't the kind of man who bent to pressure. His barn wasn't just a prop for her social media fantasies. It was a part of his life, his history, his identity. And as far as Tom was concerned, Karen's demands were nothing more than an intrusion. Still, Karen refused to give up. If anything, her resolve only strengthened. She began drafting letters, making phone calls, and plotting her next move. Little did she know, Her persistence would soon lead to consequences he never saw coming. Karen wasn't the type of person to take no lightly. In fact, she thrived on challenges like this, situations where someone dared to defy her plans. To her, Tom's refusal wasn't just inconvenient, it was personal. How dare he reject her vision? Didn't he realize she was doing him a favor by including his barn in something so glamorous? Karen couldn't fathom that Tom might actually value his privacy more than her approval or her promises of exposure. And so, instead of backing down, she doubled down, determined to wear him out until he gave in. Her first tactic was subtle, or at least as subtle as Karen could be. She started leaving notes on Tom's gate, each one neatly written in bold black ink. The messages ranged from sugary sweet, "Tom, I'd love to discuss the barn further," to thinly veiled threats, "This is an opportunity you won't want to miss." At first, Tom ignored them, tossing the notes into the trash without a second thought. But Karen didn't stop there. When the notes failed to yield results, she escalated to certified letters, complete with official-looking seals and legal jargon about community standards and aesthetic cohesion. Tom read through them once, shook his head in disbelief, and filed them away in a drawer labeled Karen Nonsense. Still, Karen wasn't done. She began recruiting allies, or at least trying to. Armed with her clipboard and a rehearsed speech, she approached her neighbors, painting herself as the voice of reason and progress. "Don't you think it's strange," she'd say, "that one person gets to dictate what the rest of us can enjoy? That barn could bring so much value to our community." Some of the homeowners listened politely but ultimately shrugged it off, unwilling to get involved in what they saw as a minor dispute. Others avoided her altogether, ducking behind hedges or pretending not to hear her knock when she came calling. Frustrated but undeterred, Karen turned to the HOA board, presenting her case during their monthly meeting. She argued passionately that Tom's barn was an eyesore and a potential safety hazard, despite knowing full well that neither claim held water. Her real motive became glaringly obvious when she slipped in a comment about how such a historic structure deserves to shine. In photoshoots, naturally. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with her blatant manipulation. One member finally spoke up, saying, "Look, Karen, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't really an HOA issue. It's private property." Undeterred, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She began filing formal complaints against Tom, citing everything from noise pollution, the pig's occasional squeals, to improper waste management, the compost pile near the barn. Each complaint came with a flurry of emails, copied to lawyers and marked urgent. Tom received notifications almost daily, each one more absurd than the last. He tried to stay calm, reminding himself that Karen's antics were just noise, empty threats meant to rattle him. But as the weeks dragged on, the constant harassment began to wear him down. Late one evening, after another long day of dealing with Karen's nonsense, Tom sat on his porch nursing a cup of coffee. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in hues of purple and gold. Normally, this was his favorite time of day, a moment to unwind and reflect. But tonight, all he could think about was Karen. Who did she think she was, barging into his life and demanding he hand over something so deeply personal? The barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was a piece of his family's legacy. It represented hard work, resilience, and generations of love poured into the land. To let someone like Karen use it for her vanity project felt like a betrayal, not just to himself, but to his ancestors who had built it. As he stared out at the darkening fields, a flicker of defiance sparked within him. He realized something important. Karen thrived on control, on bending others to her will. She expected people to bow to her demands, no matter how unreasonable. But Tom wasn't like everyone else. He didn't care about her social media followers or her grand visions. What mattered to him was protecting what was his, and teaching Karen a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. With that thought, Tom leaned back in his chair, letting the cool night air wash over him. He didn't have a plan yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Karen had underestimated him, and sooner or later, she'd find out exactly why that was a mistake. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the hills when Tom woke up with a strange sense of resolve. He had spent the night tossing and turning, his mind racing with thoughts of Karen and her relentless demands. But somewhere between the quiet darkness and the first light of dawn, an idea began to take shape, an idea so simple yet so perfectly suited to the situation that it brought a small grin to his face. It wasn't malicious or cruel. It was just fitting. If Karen wanted a show, he'd give her one. And if she thought she could push him around, well, she was about to learn otherwise. Tom started his day as usual, feeding the chickens and checking on the goats. But when he reached the pig pen, he paused for a moment, looking at his pigs with newfound appreciation. Bessie, Wilbur, and the rest of the gang were already stirring, snuffling around in the mud and rooting through scraps. They weren't particularly photogenic, not unless you counted their adorable wiggly tails, but they had a certain charm. More importantly, they had a knack for making messes that even the most determined person would struggle to clean up. Tom chuckled softly to himself. "Looks like you're getting some fresh air today," he said to them, patting the fence. Later that afternoon, Karen arrived at Tom's property without warning, flanked by 2 HOA representatives and a photographer lugging expensive equipment. She wore a pristine white sundress, designer sandals, and oversized sunglasses perched atop her perfectly styled hair. Her lips curled into a smug smile as she strode toward the barn, clearly expecting Tom to cave under the weight of her entourage. After all, who could resist such a display of authority? Tom was waiting for her, leaning casually against the fence post with his arms crossed. His expression was calm, almost amused, which only seemed to irritate Karen further. "Well?" she demanded, tapping her foot impatiently. "Are you going to let us in, or do we need to involve the authorities?" Before Tom could respond, the pigs beat him to it, or rather, they made their presence known. Dozens of them trotted out from behind the barn, their hooves kicking up clumps of dirt and mud as they explored their new freedom. The sight stopped Karen dead in her tracks. Her jaw dropped open, and her sunglasses slid down her nose as she stared in disbelief. What is this?" she stammered, pointing at the pigs. Tom shrugged innocently. "Oh, sorry about that. I guess I forgot to mention. The barn doubles as a pig pen. These guys like to hang out here sometimes. Can't really keep 'em away." Karen's face turned bright red as the pigs wandered closer, completely unconcerned by the humans gawking at them. One particularly bold piglet waddled right up to Karen, sniffing curiously at her shoe before deciding it looked good enough to nibble on. She shrieked and stumbled backward, landing ungracefully in a patch of mud. Her pristine dress was instantly ruined, streaked with brown stains that no amount of dry cleaning could fix. "This is outrageous," Karen shouted, scrambling to her feet. "You can't just let these filthy animals loose. This is unacceptable." Tom raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Filthy? Oh, I wouldn't say that. They're actually quite clean, for pigs anyway. Besides, they're part of the farm. Didn't think you'd want to deal with them during your photo shoot, but hey, maybe rustic chick includes a little mud these days." Karen glared at him, her hands clenched into fists. The photographer and the HOA representatives stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch the spectacle unfold. The pigs, meanwhile, seemed delighted by the attention. They oinked happily, rolling in the mud, and leaving trails of hoof prints everywhere they went. Within minutes, the area around the barn was transformed into a chaotic scene of squeals, splashes, and muddy chaos. As Karen fumed, trying desperately to salvage her dignity, Tom leaned back against the fence, watching with quiet satisfaction. He didn't say much, just let the pigs do the talking. Every time Karen tried to regain control, another pig would wander too close, forcing her to retreat further. By the time she finally gave up and stormed off, her dress was beyond saving. Her shoes were caked in muck, and her carefully crafted demeanor had crumbled entirely. When the group finally left, Tom couldn't help but laugh. He hadn't planned for things to go quite so smoothly, but he wasn't complaining. For the first time in weeks, he felt a deep sense of peace, and maybe even a little pride. Karen had underestimated him, assuming he'd fold under pressure. Instead, he'd turned the tables in the most unexpected way possible. As he watched the pigs settle back into their routine, Tom knew one thing for sure: Karen wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. News of Karen's disastrous visit to Tom's farm spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance from the drama couldn't resist sharing what they'd seen, or at least what they'd heard. Some claimed they'd witnessed the entire scene unfold. Karen in her ruined white sundress, slipping and sliding in the mud, while pigs surrounded her like a chaotic entourage. Others added embellishments, saying the pigs had chased her all the way back to her car, or that one particularly bold piglet had stolen her sunglasses right off her face. Whether exaggerated or not, the stories painted a vivid picture of justice served in the most unexpected way. Word eventually reached social media, thanks to a teenager who happened to be walking by during the incident. Armed with a smartphone, the young bystander captured a few photos of Karen mid-meltdown, her designer dress splattered with mud, her expression equal parts horror and fury. Those images quickly went viral, accompanied by captions like, "When you try to mess with a farmer's barn," and "Pigs won, Karen 0." Memes followed soon after, turning Karen into an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. One popular post featured a cartoon pig wearing sunglasses with the caption, "I'm the real influencer now." The online reaction was swift and merciless. People praised Tom for his clever retaliation, calling him everything from a folk hero to the patron saint of standing your ground. Comment sections filled with messages of support, many applauding his restraint in not resorting to harsher measures. "Karen got exactly what she deserved," wrote one commenter. Another chimed in, "If you think you can waltz onto someone's property and demand things, expect the animals to have something to say about it." Even local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the Great Pig Incident, and interviewing Tom briefly about the ordeal. When asked how he felt about becoming an overnight celebrity, Tom simply smiled and said, "Just doing my part to keep life interesting." For Karen, however, the aftermath was anything but amusing. Humiliated and defeated, she retreated from public view almost immediately. Her once active Instagram page fell silent as followers began unfollowing her in droves. The hashtags #farmhousechic and #countryvibes were replaced with mocking tags like #mudqueen and #pigpenphotoshoot. A few brave souls even left comments on her posts, asking if she planned to include pigs in future shoots. She deleted her account shortly afterward, unable to handle the ridicule. But the fallout didn't stop there. Back in Willow Creek Estates, the HOA board distanced itself from Karen entirely, embarrassed by her behavior and eager to avoid any association with the scandal. Complaints against Tom mysteriously disappeared, and no further attempts were made to pressure him into compliance. In fact, some of the neighbors started visiting Tom's farm, curious to see the infamous barn, and maybe catch a glimpse of the legendary pigs. To their surprise, Tom welcomed them warmly, offering tours and sharing stories about his family's history. Slowly but surely, the tension between Tom and the development began to ease. As for Karen, she became something of a cautionary tale. Parents in the neighborhood joked about using her name to scare misbehaving kids. "If you're not careful, we'll let Karen move next door." and gardeners muttered under their breath whenever anyone suggested planting flowers near the edge of the property. Eventually, Karen put her house on the market and moved back to the city, vowing never to set foot in the countryside again. Rumor had it she switched her focus to minimalist interior design, though no one really cared enough to follow her new endeavors. Tom, meanwhile, returned to his peaceful routine, grateful for the return of normalcy. Life on the farm resumed its usual rhythm, feeding the animals, fixing fences, and enjoying quiet evenings on the porch. The pigs, unaware of the chaos they'd caused, continued roaming freely, blissfully content in their muddy paradise, and every time Tom looked at the barn, he couldn't help but smile, knowing it had played a starring role in teaching Karen, and perhaps others, a valuable lesson about respecting boundaries. Though the incident brought unexpected attention, Tom remained unchanged. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune. All he wanted was to live his life on his own terms. As the days turned into weeks, the laughter faded, the headlines disappeared, and the world moved on. But in that small corner of the countryside, the memory of the day the pigs saved the barn lived on. A reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are also the most satisfying. Karen's retreat from the countryside was as quiet as her arrival had been loud. After the pig incident, she seemed to disappear entirely, holing up in her house and avoiding any interaction with the neighbors. The few times she ventured out, usually late at night when she thought no one would notice, she kept her head down, clutching her car keys like a lifeline. Gone were the designer outfits and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she opted for oversized sweatshirts and sneakers, looking more like someone trying to blend into the background than the self-proclaimed head of community relations. It was clear that the embarrassment of the photoshoot fiasco had left its mark. But karma wasn't done with Karen just yet. As it turned out, the viral photos of her mud-soaked meltdown didn't fade away as quickly as she hoped. They resurfaced repeatedly, popping up in comment threads, memes, and even local news retrospectives about quirky small-town stories. One particularly cruel twist came when a national morning show featured a segment on social media fails, using Karen's picture as an example of what not to do when demanding access to private property. The hosts laughed good-naturedly, but their jokes stung all the same. For Karen, who had always craved admiration and validation online, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. Her attempts to salvage her reputation only made things worse. Desperate to reclaim control of her narrative, Karen created a new Instagram account under a different name, posting carefully curated images of minimalist home decor and inspirational quotes. She captioned these posts with vague statements like, "Sometimes life gives us lessons we don't expect," or "Grace comes in many forms, even messy ones." But her followers weren't fooled. Commenters recognized her immediately, flooding her posts with pig emojis and snarky remarks about barns and mud baths. Within days, Karen deleted the account altogether, retreating further into isolation. Meanwhile, back at Tom's farm, life carried on much as it always had, but with a subtle shift. Neighbors who had once been wary of him now greeted him warmly, stopping by to chat or bring over homemade pies as a gesture of gratitude. Many admitted they'd secretly cheered for him during his standoff with Karen, though none had dared to speak up at the time. Some even confessed that her antics had been the final straw, pushing them to push back against the HOA's overly strict rules. Inadvertently, Tom had become a symbol of resistance, a reminder that standing your ground could inspire others to do the same. The pigs, of course, remained blissfully unaware of their newfound fame. To them, the world was still a playground of mud puddles, tasty roots, and endless fields to explore. But Tom couldn't help but feel a renewed appreciation for his unlikely heroes. He started calling them his security team, joking that they were better at keeping intruders away than any guard dog. Visitors to the farm often asked if they could meet the famous pigs, and Tom happily obliged, introducing each one by name and sharing amusing anecdotes about their personalities. Bessie, the bossy one, became a particular favorite, earning herself a fan club among the kids in the neighborhood. As the weeks turned into months, the tension between Tom and Willow Creek Estates dissolved completely. The HOA board sent him a handwritten letter apologizing for Karen's behavior and promising to respect his property moving forward. Tom accepted the apology graciously, though he suspected it was more about saving face than genuine remorse. Still, it marked a turning point, a mutual understanding that peace was preferable to conflict. For Karen, however, there was no such resolution. Unable to endure the whispers and sideways glances any longer, she finally put her house on the market. It sold surprisingly quickly, likely because potential buyers were eager to avoid association with the infamous Piggate scandal. Before leaving town, Karen packed her belongings into a moving truck and drove away without saying goodbye to anyone. Rumors circulated that she'd sworn off rural living forever, vowing to stick to urban environments where pigs were safely confined to butcher shops and bacon strips. Tom didn't waste much time thinking about Karen after she left. Instead, he focused on the positive changes her departure brought. A stronger sense of community, a deeper connection to his land, and a newfound appreciation for the simple joys of country living. Sitting on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on everything that had happened. Life had thrown him a curveball, but he handled it with humor, patience, and a little help from his four-legged friends. And in doing so, he'd reminded everyone, including himself, that sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to let nature take its course. Months had passed since Karen's dramatic exit, and life in the countryside had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. The Willow Creek Estates neighborhood, once dominated by Karen's overbearing presence, had transformed into a quieter, friendlier place. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around her rules now greeted each other with genuine warmth, hosting barbecues and weekend gatherings that spilled over into Tom's driveway. Even the HOA meetings became less formal and more collaborative, focusing on practical solutions rather than aesthetic nitpicking. It was as if Karen's absence had lifted an invisible weight from everyone's shoulders. For Tom, the change was especially noticeable. He no longer woke up dreading another certified letter or passive-aggressive note left on his gate. Instead, he found himself looking forward to the little surprises that came with being part of a community, like the fresh loaf of bread someone dropped off one morning, or the group of kids who occasionally visited to play with the pigs. They called themselves the Pig Patrol, complete with handmade badges pinned to their shirts, and loved hearing Tom's stories about Bessie's bossiness or Wilbur's knack for escaping fences. Watching them laugh and squeal alongside the animals reminded Tom of simpler times when life wasn't complicated by hashtags or HOA complaints. The barn, too, seemed to have taken on a new life. Once a quiet relic of the past, it had become a symbol of resilience and resourcefulness, a testament to the idea that even something old and weathered could hold immense value. Visitors often remarked on its charm, marveling at how it stood proudly despite decades of wear and tear. Tom took pride in showing it off, sharing tales of his grandfather's craftsmanship and the countless storms the structure had weathered. In many ways, the barn mirrored Tom himself, steadfast, unpretentious, and deeply rooted in the land. As autumn gave way to winter, Tom spent more time reflecting on everything that had happened. He realized that Karen's arrival, while disruptive, had taught him something important. Before her intrusion, he'd lived quietly, content to keep to himself and avoid conflict. But standing up to her, and doing so in such a clever, light-hearted way, had awakened a sense of confidence he hadn't known he possessed. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected to the world around him, not just as a farmer, but as a member of a larger community. And while he didn't crave attention, he couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing he'd inspired others to stand their ground when faced with unreasonable demands. Karen, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, or at least that's what people assumed. Occasionally, rumors surfaced about her attempts to reinvent herself in the city. Some said she'd started a blog about urban gardening, though readership numbers were reportedly dismal. Others claim she joined a yoga studio and tried to position herself as a wellness guru, only to be outshined by instructors half her age. Whatever path she chose, it was clear she hadn't returned to her old ways. Whether humbled by the experience or simply unwilling to risk another pig-related disaster, Karen appeared to have learned her lesson, at least temporarily. Back on the farm, Tom embraced the slower pace of winter. The fields lay dormant under a blanket of snow, and the pigs huddled together in their cozy pen, enjoying the occasional snack of leftover pumpkins from Halloween. On crisp mornings, Tom brewed strong coffee and sat on the porch, watching the steam rise from his mug as the sun broke through the frosty air. These moments of stillness allowed him to appreciate the beauty of his surroundings and the simplicity of a life well lived. One evening, as he strolled toward the barn to check on things before bed, Tom paused to glance back at his house. The windows glowed warmly in the twilight, framed by icicles hanging from the eaves like glittering chandeliers. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying with it the faint scent of burning wood. Everything felt right, balanced, peaceful, whole. He thought about Karen briefly, wondering if she ever looked around her sleek city apartment and missed the open skies and rolling hills of the countryside. Then he shook his head, chuckling softly. No matter where she ended up, he doubted she'd ever understand what made this place special. In the end, the story of Karen and the pigs was more than just a tale of entitlement meeting its match. It was a reminder that life has a way of teaching lessons we didn't know we needed. For Tom, it reinforced the importance of staying true to oneself and protecting what matters most. For Karen, it served as a humbling wake-up call, one that hopefully stuck. And for the rest of the neighborhood, it brought a renewed appreciation